Court is now in session. Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Court Martial, which is episode 15 of season 1 of Star Trek The Original Series. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Original Series, one episode at a time. In this video I will cover the first season episode, Court Martial. So Court Martial was the episode where Kirk the Enterprise returns from an ion storm in which the records officer was killed, and Kirk is then blamed for that death, having made a mistake, having jettisoned the pod before going to red alert, when he insists that he did it, but the Admiralty insists that he take a desk job, but he refuses, and so they convene a court martial which could completely destroy his career. Now, while Kirk continues to profess his innocence, the computer and records all showed that he's guilty until Spock, of course, plays a game of chess, which doesn't go the way he thinks it should against the computer, so finds out that there's a flaw in the computer system. We find out the officer in question did not in fact die and faked his death and framed Kirk for it, and when he is discovered, he tries to destroy the Enterprise, but is then thwarted by Kirk, whose name is now clear. So this is the prototype of the wrongfully accused courtroom Trek episode, which is something we've seen a lot of times where one of our main characters is accused of a crime they clearly didn't commit and is put on trial, and they have a trial that we have to clear their name. This is a cliche we get over and over and over and over and over again. Now, this isn't to be confused with other trial episodes, because there are other trial episodes where it's not necessarily about someone being accused of a crime they didn't commit. Measure of the Man comes to mind, and also the very next episode that was made after this one, The Menagerie, which also features a court martial. However, that's not really about a wrongfully accused thing. It's about something that Spock actually did. So it's not in that same cliched category, and for me gets a little bit more of a pass than the wrongfully accused cliche, which I am sick of. I don't like. And the fact is, the U.S. said, oh, Mark, this is the first one. This is before they did all those copies. That doesn't make it better. It makes it worse, because it's setting the cliche. It's setting the stage. And in fact, it's the most cliche by the numbers one of all of them. In fact, some of them I don't mind, like the Matter of Perspective one with the Riker. I actually kind of like that one. This one I don't. This one doesn't really offer anything interesting or anything new. It's just a wrongfully accused hodgepodge of normal wrongfully accused storylines that we always see. Now, and again, the original series do some episodes which are original. It's not like the original series is incapable of being creative, incapable of being original, just because it's the first. Just like Mirror, Mirror, for example, is the first parallel universe, one of the first ones in like popular science fiction. And, you know, popular meaning like not obscure books or novels, but like television and movies. And yet it still comes off as original. It still comes off as unique, and it still is a really good episode. So it's not the argument that, oh, because it's the first one, that's why it's a bit bland and cliche. Bullshit. That is not always the case with the original series. It is the case with this episode. Now, so where to begin with this episode? So when Kirk is like, he goes to the Admiral, and the Admiral's being... Now, to be fair, this Admiral isn't so much as an obstinate bureaucrat. He's kind of makes sense. He's kind of one of the more reasonable Admirals portrayed in Starfleet, because he's shown a computer record that shows that Kirk clearly, jettisoned the pod before red alert. And so he's like, well, so I must assume there that you're lying to me right now and you have perjured yourself. And so, you got to take this desk job. That's actually reasonable. Like all the steps he takes along the way is reasonable. He just doesn't know that, he's being framed. But once he is presented with that evidence, he completely changes his tune. So, yeah, so I actually didn't mind the Admiral character himself. But, I liked it, by the way. I gotta mention the scene where the Admiral is like, well, then you draw a general court martial. And Kirk's like, draw it? I demand it! And I didn't have the time beforehand, but I was gonna, draw a picture of a general court. draw a general court. Anyway. So, so this was... Yeah, so let me talk about the lawyers. So we have the the prosecutor, who is a love interest of Kirk. And I kind of like the scene where she first meets up with Kirk and he doesn't know that she's going to prosecute his case, and he's just flirting with her hardcore, and she's trying to talk about the case. He's like, hey, let's not talk shop, let's give it up. Let me talk about your eyes and how beautiful they are. And she's like, yeah, that's good too, but you're in serious trouble here. And then eventually, they're being really coy, and at the end of the conversation, he's like, look, you haven't told me how it is you know so much about the case. He's like, because, my dear Captain Kirk, I'm the one prosecuting it. Again, it's the way, she talks kind of like the typical damsel. And then when she's in court, she's actually a professional. But then at the end, once the court's over, she's again the damsel with the high-pitched, soft voice. Oh, little old me, I live to worship you, Kirk, because women always have to be obsessed with you. God, I fucking hate that. But anyway, so... yeah, that was silly, and I didn't really buy this character and the whole thing that they had this fling and she's forced to prosecute him. That was cheesy. That was dumb. I didn't appreciate that. But now let me talk about the defense attorney, the attorney that Jim gets. Now, it seems to me that everything that the episode is saying, telling me overtly, what it's saying to me is that this is a great attorney. He's so great. Look at what a great job he does. God, he's such a good attorney. But what the episode is showing me is that this attorney actually sucks. He doesn't do anything. Alright, so there's all these witnesses that try to, Spock and McCoy, that try to speak to Kirk's character, but the prosecutor sort of, whittles them down to be like, well, you can't go against logic, and does a good job. And every single time he's like, oh, no questions, nah, I don't care, no questions, whatever, no questions. And then finally he's like, eventually the Admiral's like, look, dude, why the hell aren't you asking any questions? And he's like, well, I just want to hear from Kirk. So he gets Kirk up, and Kirk tells his side of the story, but then the prosecutor reminds me of actually Better Call Saul. Remember the first episode of Better Call Saul where Saul Goodman, or Jimmy McGill, if you will, makes this really impassionate speech for his clients, and then the prosecutor just looks at him, says nothing, wheels out this TV, and shows a video of Saul's clients raping a dead corpse. So it reminds me of that, where the prosecutor, where Kirk was saying all these great speeches, and the defense lawyer's like, yeah, and bring them up, and the prosecutor's wheels out the TV, shows the picture that proves that Kirk is lying. And I think she does say some things, but it is very reminiscent of that to me. And so Kirk's case is blown. And so at this point, the defense attorney was like, oh, I think we lost the case. I think you should just give in. There's nothing more I can do. You're and he starts to believe that Kirk was lying. And then Spock comes up with the evidence that saves him. So just at the end, right when the defense attorney is about to just give up and say, I rest my case. Actually, he does say it. Spock comes in with the evidence that will save it. And then all of a sudden he makes this ridiculous speech to the judge about the human condition and how you'll bring us down to the level of the computer if you do not hear what I say right now. Which is a dumb speech, to be honest. It is a nonsense speech. And the Admiral, of course, buys it, which he shouldn't have. And then when they go to the Enterprise, and I'll get to that point later, but when they go to the Enterprise to like do this experiment to prove that Finney's still alive, the defense lawyer's like, I submit to you that Finney, in fact, is not dead. He's still alive, and the Admiral's like, oh my god, explain yourself. He's like, nah, I'd rather not, and he just fucks off and leaves. So, and then Kirk does the rest, he proves his point, and the defense attorney does nothing. So what did the defense attorney actually do? So I know that the episode was probably trying to portray that he's like eccentric or some sort of badass by sitting there and not cross-examining any of the witness, but that's actually bad lawyering. Like, I've been watching this Legal Eagle channel a lot, which I know nothing about being a lawyer, nothing about the law, but watching that YouTube channel is pretty interesting, especially when he analyzes TV shows and compares them to and shows how unrealistic they are. I wish he would have done. He did The Measure of the Man, but I wish he would have done this episode. That would have been great to see. Come on. Why are you hissing, Lillian? The kittens are chasing her. Lillian! Oh, it's okay. Sweetie. Here, where are you? It's okay. Anyway, so yeah, I would have loved to see him rip this lawyer apart. I'm pretty confident just from watching his videos and seeing the stuff he says that he would say this, that he would say that this is a terrible lawyer, and him not doing cross-examinations isn't badass, it isn't eccentric, it isn't like a master waiting to move his chest, because what is his ultimate move? His ultimate move is for Kirk to come in and tell his story, which is then immediately, what's she doing? It's immediately contradicted by the evidence, and he looks like an idiot. So he's a terrible lawyer. And the only reason that Kirk wins this case is because of Spock. Because Spock found the evidence that proved his innocent. And then when it comes time to show this evidence to the judge, he fucks off and doesn't do anything. And then at the end of the episode, they're trying to, like, when they say, that lawyer, I can't remember his name now, but the defense lawyer dude is defending Finney. And they're like, and they pass it up like, he's definitely going to win. That's a good lawyer. No, Finney's screwed. He's going to lose. This is a terrible lawyer. This lawyer absolutely sucks. Sorry, partly laughing at my cats jumping on me. Anyway. And also I get from this episode that no one in the 23rd century understands the concept of a conflict of interest. Because Kirk had a past romance with this prosecuting attorney. And she clearly still has feelings for him. Something she makes very, very clear. And yet she doesn't recuse herself from the case, like in the people who she works for, like the Starfleet. I don't even know if they mentioned Starfleet yet. I don't know if that's the thing yet. But anyway, they don't like notice this and be like, hey, maybe you got a conflict of interest here, and we should get someone else who doesn't have a massive crush on the defendant to prosecute this case. And on top of that, at the end of the episode, when she says, Finney is being defended by the defense lawyer guy, the same one. And Kirk's like, he's got a really good attorney. I'm like, no, Finney's stupid. There's a conflict of interest. He was the one that, revealed that he was alive in the first place and thwarted his plans and freed Kirk. And now he trusts him to be his defense. That's a conflict of interest. apparently, yeah, 23rd century has no concept of a conflict of interest. Now, another thing, I know that Legal Eagle would completely rip this episode to shreds, like its court room, the way that, you know, especially that whole speech about we're to level the machine, like that's complete nonsense, and just the whole way, you know, the court operates, and it went like very fast. And by the way, this is something that Legal Eagle definitely would point out, which is something I know from watching his channel a lot, is that the defense attorney dude would not be surprised by this video evidence of Kirk pushing the button before red alert, because he would have reviewed that beforehand, because it is, you know, standard procedure for you know, all evidence to be shared with the opposing counsel so they have a chance to review. They don't get bombarded in the middle of court with new evidence. But to be fair, this is a trope we see a lot in TV and movies, but it has no basis in realism. It's just there for dramatic effect. And this is the cheapest, lowest, like this whole episode is just the cheapest, lowest dramatic courtroom effect. Oh, you know. So yeah, so I don't excuse it for that, because it was done in a very cheesy fashion. And here's another scene. Before I get to the ending, here's another scene towards the beginning of the episode I thought was total bullshit and really contrived. Is when Kirk goes to the bar and there's all these members of his graduating class that are treating him like shit because they assume he's guilty, and they're like, oh, I'm just wondering when you're going to get a new records officer, Jim. And, you know, Kirk's like, so what are you implying here? Or actually he's more like, what are you implying here? And McCoy is just like, no, back off, Jim, don't worry. But I was like, no, I'm just asking the question, like, well, what are they implying? Like, what are they getting at? And they're like, you know what we're getting at. And it's like, well, I think you should just come out and say it. You think I did something? You say it. And they're like, oh yeah, whatever, Jim, you know, thanks for killing off your records officer, you fucking murderer. I don't buy that they would act that way. That is very, not only unprofessional, but like jumping to conclusions. And even if, like, let's say, you know, because they're in a situation where the evidence is pretty damning on Kirk, they still should, like, not, like, publicly, like, I just don't buy that they would publicly shame him and be like, oh, you fucking murderer. Well, at least not in Starfleet. Anyway, I don't know. Something about this just ringed very contrived and false to me. Now, let's talk about what actually happened, the big reveal. That Finney was alive, and he messed with the computers to distort the record to make it you know, appear that Kirk had jettisoned the pod before going to a red alert. Now, they mentioned in this episode several times that they did all these diagnostics and examined the computer and make sure it was functioning properly, and they couldn't find anything wrong with it. And then finally, Spock plays a game of chess that he had programmed with all of his knowledge of chess into the computer, so he should never ever be able to win. The best he should be able to accomplish is a stalemate, because the computer should be exactly as good as him. Now, because he's a Vulcan, I can kind of buy that he would be able to fully program it that way. If it was a human, I was like, well, maybe he just didn't do that good of a job programming it. But because of Spock in particular, not just any Vulcan, but Spock, I kind of can buy that he would. But really? They did like 5-6 diagnostics in the computer. They ripped out the insides to make sure nothing was wrong with it. That revealed nothing, but playing a chess with the computer showed them that the computer was fucked. I'm sorry, my friends, but your diagnostic, like, routines or your systems or whatever you do to check the computer to make sure it's functioning properly are not good. Like, they're not effective. They're not working clearly. You suck at diagnosing the computer, because any sort of diagnostic should be able to show that this was a forgery and that this was played with. And yeah, this is not like a master forgery here, Finney, who did this. Like, he just fucked with the computer a bit. They should have been able to discover this. There should have been some discrepancies, but of course the plot wouldn't work if there was, so they had to come up with this ridiculous thing so that Spock could play chess with the computer, can make an aha moment. Aha! Which this fucking diagnostic should have shown this, but that's not as dramatic as playing chess against a computer, I suppose. Especially the way we got the whole computer virus Independence Day moment in this episode, where Kirk is like, "Oh well, I hope your next captain I hope you can actually beat your next captain at chess." And Spock is like, "Chess? Ah, that gives me an idea. Let me play chess against a computer." Like, that's so dumb. Jesus Christ. Okay. So, now let's get into the really bad stuff. So, at the end of the episode, once Spock makes his discovery, goes to the lawyer, and they're like, "Oh, I request a recess and we reconvene on the Enterprise." Why? For dramatic effect for the episode. That is it. Period. End of sentence. There's no logical, legal, reasonable reason as to why the judges would allow them to reconvene on the Enterprise, or why the lawyer would even suggest it in the first fucking place. Like, they should bring their evidence to the courtroom. Yeah, this is another thing I'm certainly going to tear this episode apart. They would have to bring their evidence. They could run their experiments on their own time and then bring a record of that to the court. And so they could ask for a recess to give them time to run their experiments, but to have the court reconvene on the Enterprise where they have everyone evacuate the Enterprise except for a skeleton crew is something that they would never allow. That seems so ridiculous and out of character, and it's just theatrics, basically. It's just over-the-top cheesy melodrama that it has no sense of realism to it whatsoever, and so it's dumb. And then so they do their experiment with the heartbeats. They're like, all right, we're gonna hear all the noise, we get rid of all of the people in the Enterprise, and we're gonna record the sounds of everyone's heartbeats, and then we'll block out all the heartbeats except for, we'll get rid of them. So if they're listening to all the noise, and while they're doing this, I can hear like all the computer sounds in the background going. Why isn't the sound, if they're listening to all the sound on the ship, why isn't it picking that up, or other engine sounds or other kind of sounds? Like, that doesn't really make any sense. I guess they said something specific about heartbeats, but that's so dumb that's how they find out Finney's alive, by blocking at least hearing his heartbeat. Like, again, I'm sure this is early in the series, so I'm sure they didn't come up with the concept of internal sensors yet, but internal sensors. I'm sorry. Like, yeah, it was just dumb over the top. And on top of that, once they did discover Finney's heartbeat, Kirk is like, says the Admiral Judge is like, "Stay here, I need to take care of it." And so Kirk goes down by himself to find Finney, who's like all crazy. "Oh, you ruined my career, Kirk, and now I'm gonna kill you." No. Why is Kirk allowed to go there by himself? Why doesn't he have the security team go apprehend him? The Admiral should be like, "No, call your security team back up here, apprehend him. You're still on trial. You're still here. That is not reasonable for you to go alone by yourself to try to apprehend this person who's clearly hostile." But of course, we need that one-on-one fist fight where the stunt doubles, who look nothing like Kirk and Finney, are obviously fighting each other in a very cheesy, over-the-top, dumb sequence. So if I haven't made this clear, I really don't like this episode. So anyway, yeah, so we get our cheesy sequence, and then everything's okay, and the Admiral's like, "You saved the day," and then the prosecutor comes on board and they're like, oh, I have a lovey-dovey moment with Kirk where she kisses him on the bridge in front of everyone, and then Spock and McCoy trying to act like nothing's happened. It's so dumb. It is, not good. Let me put it to you that way. Yeah. So I think I've covered everything in this episode. Yeah, and the fact that he was able to fake his death or whatever is... Yeah, and we get this over-the-top scene at the start of the episode where his daughter is like, you killed my father! How dare you! And then 30 minutes later, she's like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm all good now. You actually didn't kill him, but you should actually plead guilty. God, that made no sense. Oh, and the fact that there's this Finney character who apparently had this long history with Kirk where Kirk reprimanded him for something that ruined his career, and now he's holding a grudge about him. That's something I really don't buy. This character we've never seen, who just pops out of nowhere just for this episode, and he's fucking crazy. They never noticed how fucking nuts he was. He's that over the top where he's like, you ruined my career and I'm gonna kill you. He was able to just be a normal officer for that long and snap all of a sudden for no reason whatsoever. Alright, so that's pretty much all I got to say about this episode. So now it is time to move over to patron comments. First of all, I want to make a huge shout out for all the Patreon supporters who support my channel. We have Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Avals, Brian A., Alessandro Miguelesio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon House. Thank you so much for your support. Now, we have a couple of comments from Patreons on this episode. First comment is from Brandon Howells. A reasonable episode until the inevitable Ben Finney is alive reveal, after which it degenerates into Kirk fighting another vengeful antagonist. And the prosecuting lawyer is an ex-lover of Kirk's. This trope is used in TNG's The Measure of a Man. Every time I watch this episode, I wonder, why don't Kirk or Spock scan the Enterprise for life signs? 7 unnamed female personnel officers out of 10. I guess it was an unnamed female personnel officer. I guess there was one of the witnesses who was this personnel officer. Maybe they didn't give her name. Anyway. Next comment is from Matty Jester. A bit of a mess, this one. It doesn't start off too bad, but the whole thing falls apart by the end. What was Finney's plan? Fake your own death to ruin Kirk's career? Then what? Destroy the Enterprise and die for real, or escape and live in hiding, but he'll never be able to see his daughter again either way? If he's seen alive, the whole charade falls apart. Ugh. This episode needs to be sentenced to that New Zealand penal settlement Tom Paris went to. 3 out of 10. Yeah, that's a good point, actually. What was Finney's ultimate plan? Here is... I don't know. My rating for Court Martial out of 10 is a 3. Very poor. So I agree. I agree more with Matty Jester's rating. This. It's. I don't give it lower than a 3 because it's not the worst thing ever. It was somewhat interesting. Did hold my attention, particularly in the first half. I gotta admit, to find Kirk trying to prove himself and the struggle he was going through. But for the most part, this episode is a disaster. It is a cliche hodgepodge mess that, when examined closely, completely falls apart. That defense attorney was actually a terrible attorney. The whole ex-lover trope was dumb. The whole big reveal at the end was super dumb. It doesn't actually make any sense. The whole reason how they couldn't discover the computer malfunction through all these diagnostics, but discovered it through playing a game of chess, is just complete nonsense. And it's, the innocent, the falsely accused innocent man being put on trial cliche, done to the biggest, cliche way ever. Yeah, so not a fan of this episode, didn't like it very much. So that's it for my review of Court Martial. So now coming up next on my channel, I never have this prepared. Okay, so of course tomorrow will be my review for Prodigy, and then Saturday I'm going back to Patreon for the Menagerie Revisited. I talked about before how they filmed these two Court Martial episodes back to back. However, the Menagerie actually aired way before Court Martial. Court Martial they actually pushed back a lot later to end the season when they aired it, probably to keep these two episodes apart so they didn't air them back to back, because they are both about court martials and both similar. But as I said, I'm doing production order, so on Saturday I shall do my revisited video on Patreon for the Menagerie, and then I'm having a week off of my Star Trek original series reviews, as doing my end of year wrap up next week, which is actually like a couple months from when I'm recording this, but from when this video goes live, it will be next week. I will be doing my top 10 shows of 2020 and reviewing and ranking some movies I saw in 2022 as well. Did I say top 10 shows of 2020? I meant 2022. That's what year we're in now, right? Yeah. Anyway, so that's next week, and then the following week I'll return with my review for Shore Leave, which will be a new review here going public on Enchantment of Eternity. So that's what's coming up next. Thank you so much for watching this. Be sure to check out my channel for many more original series reviews, my Prodigy reviews, and as I said, random top 10s and other videos and whatnot. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.